I'll have the financial advice with a side of sparkling water, Jack Anderson said, barely glancing up from his phone. Christina Matthews paused, pen hovering over her notepad. After 8 hours on her feet at La Belle Poche, Manhattan's most exclusive restaurant, this was exactly the kind of arrogant customer she didn't need. She'd dealt with plenty of entitled people, but this one, this billionaire, seemed to think his money could control everything, even the service he received. He sat there, looking over his phone, acting as though he was the most important person in the room, dismissing her with a wave of his hand. She could feel the tension rising in her chest, but she kept her cool, the smile never leaving her face. "I'm sorry, sir. I don't believe that's on our menu," she said, her voice calm but firm. Jack finally looked up, his piercing blue eyes meeting hers for a brief moment. He was expecting the usual reaction, someone cowering, eager to please. But Christina was no ordinary waitress. She wasn't intimidated. Instead, she returned his gaze with quiet confidence, a flicker of something sharp behind her eyes. "It was a joke," he said, tapping his platinum card against the table, clearly unimpressed. "But since you mentioned it, where would you invest $1 million in today's market?" Christina's colleagues had warned her about him. Jack Anderson, 33, tech genius turned investment mogul, was known for his ruthless business tactics and tendency to toy with people when bored. But Christina wasn't impressed. She met his gaze directly, without flinching. "Honestly, I'd diversify 40% into emerging market ETFs focusing on sustainable energy, 30% in mid-cap value stocks currently undervalued due to market overcorrection, 20% in municipal bonds for tax advantages, and keep 10% liquid for opportunistic acquisitions," she said, her voice steady, even as the entire room seemed to freeze around them. Jack put down his phone, his eyes narrowing, surprised. "That's surprisingly specific," he said, leaning forward. "Did you memorize that from somewhere?" "No, sir. Just an opinion now about your actual order," she replied, keeping her tone neutral, her face the picture of professionalism. "Wait," Jack said, his curiosity piqued. "Explain the emerging market rationale." Christina glanced around at her other tables, her expression unchanged. "I have customers waiting," she said simply. "They can wait." She gestured to the empty chair opposite him. "Sit. 5 minutes. I'll make it worth your while." Jack's eyes narrowed again. "I could lose my job," she responded, but his persistence was undeniable. His confidence, built on billions, was used to getting what he wanted. But there was something about this woman that intrigued him. He gestured to the empty seat. She hesitated for a second, but then reluctantly took the seat across from him, setting her notepad aside. Jack studied her face closely. "Where did that come from? Finance major? Something like that." Christina's fingers toyed with the edge of her water glass. "Columbia, NYU," she said, avoiding his gaze. "Does it matter?" Jack's brows furrowed, but he couldn't stop himself from being impressed. "You asked a question as a joke." I answered. Christina's voice held no sign of defensiveness, no hesitation. It was simply a fact. Jack smirked. "Fair enough," he said, taking a slow sip of his whiskey. "You caught me being an ass, but now I'm genuinely curious. Tell me about sustainable energy in emerging markets." Christina didn't flinch. "Western markets are oversaturated with green investments chasing limited opportunities, creating a bubble effect. Meanwhile, developing nations offer more significant growth potential with their expanding energy needs and fewer regulatory hurdles. Their governments are desperate for infrastructure investment, offering tax incentives that boost ROI by at least 4% annually." Jack's jaw tightened slightly. That wasn't just informed, it was sophisticated analysis. He leaned back in his chair, studying her. "Who are you?" he asked, genuinely perplexed. Christina met his gaze with a small, enigmatic smile. "Just a waitress with an interest in finance." She stood up and turned to walk away. "Now, can I take your actual order, or would you prefer to continue interrogating me about my hobbies?" Jack watched her walk away, the grace in her movements oddly captivating. He was left speechless, unsure of what to make of this woman. What had just happened? He hadn't expected this. Most women, most people for that matter, would have been too intimidated to speak to him that way. But she was different. He pulled out his phone and quickly typed a message. "Need background check. Christina Matthews. Priority." The response came quickly. "On it. Preliminary report by morning." Jack put his phone away, his mind racing. Christina Matthews had just done something that no one else had ever dared to do. She'd surprised him. He couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to her than met the eye. Christina returned to her section, trying to focus on the tasks at hand. She couldn't shake off the feeling of Jack's piercing eyes watching her, studying her every move. Her mind kept replaying their conversation over and over again, wondering what he really thought of her. As she walked past his table to check on other guests, she saw him glancing at his phone, the screen flashing with a series of messages. She couldn't help but feel a sense of unease, as if something was happening beyond her control. She knew Jack had a reputation for being ruthless, but she hadn't expected him to be so curious. It was almost as if he was trying to uncover something about her, something she wasn't ready to reveal. She pushed the thought aside and continued with her duties, but the unease lingered. Later that evening, as the dinner rush began to slow down, Christina found herself standing by the service station, refilling her water pitcher when Jack approached her again. He looked different this time, less confident, almost hesitant. "Christina," he said, his voice softer than before. "Can I ask you something?" She raised an eyebrow, keeping her tone neutral. "Sure, Mr. Anderson. What's on your mind?" Jack hesitated for a moment, then slid an envelope across the counter towards her. "I did some checking into your background," he said, his eyes avoiding hers. "And I'm genuinely curious. You didn't just memorize those financial strategies. You know what you're talking about. I want to know more." Christina's heart skipped a beat, but she didn't. "Let it show?" She glanced at the envelope, then back at Jack. "You went through the trouble of checking on me?" she asked, her voice cool, but her mind racing. "Yes," he said. "I needed to know who I was dealing with." She paused for a moment, considering his words carefully. "I'm just a waitress, Mr. Anderson," she replied, her voice steady. "What you see is all there is." Jack didn't seem convinced. He leaned in slightly, his gaze focused intently on her. "I don't believe that for a second. Someone with that level of knowledge doesn't just fall into a job like this. You're hiding something." Christina's pulse quickened, but she kept her expression impassive. "I'm not hiding anything. This is what I do. I work here because I need to, and that's all there is to it." Jack studied her for a long moment before nodding slowly. "Fine, but I'm offering you something. A chance to work with me, to be part of something bigger." Christina felt her heart race at the offer. She had dreamed of working in finance, of using her skills in a way that mattered, but this was too much. She wasn't ready to leave behind the life she had built here, the small, quiet world she had created for herself. "I'm happy where I am," she said, the words feeling like a lie even as she spoke them. Jack's expression softened, but there was still a determination in his eyes. "Think about it, Christina. You could have a real future, not just as a waitress, but as someone who shapes the future of the companies you've been studying." Christina stared at him, the weight of his words sinking in. She had always dreamed of something more, but she had never dared to reach for it. Now, here it was, laid out in front of her, an opportunity to change everything. But was she ready for it? Could she risk everything she had worked for just to follow a dream she had buried so deep? Jack stood there, waiting for her response, but Christina didn't know what to say. She looked at the envelope again, her mind swirling with the possibilities. What if this was her chance? What if this was everything she had ever wanted? She swallowed hard, her decision hanging in the air between them. Christina spent the next few days in a whirlwind of uncertainty. The offer Jack had made lingered in her mind, but the more she thought about it, the more conflicted she became. She was used to her quiet life, the one she had built up slowly, brick by brick. The restaurant, the familiar faces of customers, and the comfort of knowing exactly what was expected of her. The idea of leaving that all behind to step into the unknown terrified her. But then there was the nagging feeling, the realization that she had been living in a box, never letting herself truly reach for something bigger, something more. She stood in front of the mirror in her tiny apartment, adjusting the strap of her worn-out bag. She looked at her reflection, trying to see the woman Jack had seen, the woman who had the potential to change everything. Could she really do it? Could she step out of her comfort zone and accept the offer? It felt like a risk, a huge one, but was it one worth taking? She couldn't shake the thought. Every time she thought about her future, she imagined herself still standing in the same place, doing the same thing. Was that the life she wanted? Or could she push past her fears and make something of herself? The answer wasn't easy, but deep down, she knew what she had to do. Jack's words echoed in her mind. Asterisk, you could have a real future, not just as a waitress, but as someone who shapes the future of the companies you've been studying. Asterisk Christina had spent years studying financial strategies, reading about the markets, following the trends, but it was always a side hobby. Now, she realized, it was time to stop hiding. Time to step into the role she had always dreamed of, but never thought she could have. She had worked too hard to stay invisible, to live under the radar. But was it possible for someone like her to make it in a world so far removed from her own? She pulled her phone from her bag and stared at Jack's number, hesitating for a moment. Then, with a deep breath, she pressed dial. The phone rang a few times before Jack's familiar voice answered. Christina, he said, as though he had been expecting her call. I've been waiting for you to reach out. She felt a sudden rush of nerves. Mr. Anderson, she started, but her voice wavered slightly. I've been thinking about your offer. There was a brief silence on the other end of the line before he spoke again. And, he asked, his tone calm but curious. I'm in, she said, the words coming out faster than she expected. I'm ready to take the next step. Jack's response was quick and filled with enthusiasm. Good. I knew you had it in you. Let's get started. As she hung up the phone, a mix of excitement and fear flooded her chest. She had just made a decision that would change everything. There was no turning back now. She was ready to embrace the unknown and face whatever challenges came her way. She had always been more than just a waitress. Now, it was time for the world to see that too. Christina spent the next few days preparing for her new journey, but she couldn't shake the butterflies in her stomach. The familiar sounds of the restaurant, the clinking of silverware, the chatter of customers, had always been her comfort zone. But now, each day felt like a countdown to something bigger, something unknown. She walked through the front door of La Belle Poche for the last time, taking in the familiar scent of fresh-baked bread and the soft hum of kitchen staff working in sync. Today, she was not just another waitress. She was about to step into a world that had always seemed out of reach. Her shift began like any other. The usual faces, the usual routine. But today, it felt different. She was different. As the evening wore on, her mind kept drifting back to the phone call she had made to Jack. She had committed herself to this new chapter, but there was still a part of her that questioned if she was truly ready for it. At closing time, Christina packed up her things slowly, savoring the last moments of her life in this familiar place. Her coworkers gave her puzzled looks as she moved to the back of the restaurant, collecting her belongings. They didn't understand. They didn't know the opportunity she had just accepted. The door to the restaurant closed behind her with a soft click, and she stepped into the crisp night air. The city's lights flickered in the distance, and the buzz of the busy streets felt almost like a distant hum now. As she walked to the subway station, her thoughts were a whirlwind of emotions. She had always known she was capable of more. She had always believed she could be more than just a waitress. But taking that first step into the unknown had always felt too risky. Now, there was no turning back. She had chosen this path, and it would change her life in ways she couldn't yet fully comprehend. The subway ride felt like it took forever, her mind racing with thoughts of what the future held. The door of her apartment closed quietly behind her, and she exhaled deeply. This was it. She was no longer the woman who served tables at a high-end restaurant in Manhattan. She was someone with a purpose, someone with potential. Christina sat on her bed, staring at the phone on her nightstand. She had made the decision, but now came the hard part, doing it. The pressure was on, and there was no going back. The next morning, she woke up early, her mind already racing with the possibilities that lay ahead. She had a meeting with Jack at his office, and she was determined to show him that she belonged in his world. She dressed carefully, choosing a simple but professional outfit. Nothing too flashy, just a reflection of the confidence she was trying to cultivate. As she stood in front of the mirror, adjusting her jacket, she caught her reflection. The woman staring back at her was different from the one who had walked into the restaurant only days before. She was no longer the shy, uncertain waitress. She was someone with ambition, with a drive to prove herself. The subway ride felt quicker this time, her nerves replaced by a quiet confidence. As she stepped off the train and made her way to the building, her heart began to race again. But this time it wasn't fear. It was anticipation. When she entered Jack's office building, she couldn't help but notice the contrast between the sleek, polished environment and the gritty, worn-out apartment she had just left behind. She had never imagined herself in a place like this, but now it felt like it was exactly where she was meant to be. Jack greeted her with a nod as she walked into his office. His face betrayed no emotion, but his eyes seemed to study her, sizing her up. "I'm glad you made it," he said, motioning for her to sit. Christina sat down, her posture straight, her hands resting calmly in her lap. She was ready. "So," Jack began, "let's see what you've got." Christina took a deep breath, her nerves still lingering, but she wasn't going to let them control her. She was ready to prove herself, ready to show Jack that she wasn't just a waitress anymore. She was someone who could make a difference. The moment she spoke, she knew that this was the start of something new, something that could change everything. Christina sat across from Jack in his sleek, modern office, her hands resting lightly on the polished surface of the desk. She could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her, but she was determined not to let it show. Jack's sharp eyes studied her closely, his expression unreadable. There was no small talk, no pleasantries. It was clear this was going to be different from anything she had ever experienced. "Let's start with what you know," Jack said, his tone businesslike, yet there was a hint of curiosity behind his words. Christina nodded, taking a steadying breath. She had prepared for this. She had spent countless hours studying, learning everything she could about the world she was about to enter. The world that Jack had been a part of for so long. "I've been studying market trends, investment strategies," she began, her voice steady but confident. "Emerging markets are my focus. Countries with fast-growing economies, often overlooked by mainstream investors. I believe these markets hold a lot of untapped potential, especially in sectors like renewable energy and tech." Jack didn't interrupt, but she could tell he was listening closely. She continued, her words flowing more easily now. "I've also looked at the social and environmental impact of these investments. There's a growing demand for sustainable solutions, and I believe that companies that position themselves to meet this demand will see significant returns." As she spoke, she saw Jack's expression shift slightly. His eyes narrowed ever so slightly, a sign of interest. She wasn't just speaking numbers. She was speaking with conviction, with a depth of understanding he hadn't expected. "You've done your homework," Jack said, his tone no longer as indifferent. "Most people just throw out buzzwords. But you're actually backing it up with strategy." Christina felt a surge of pride, but she kept it hidden behind her professional demeanor. This was the moment she had worked for. This was the opportunity she had dreamed of. She couldn't afford to let her nerves show now. "I also believe in diversifying portfolios to mitigate risk," she continued, feeling more comfortable with each word. "You can't rely on one sector or one market. A well-balanced portfolio is key to long-term growth." Jack leaned back in his chair, his fingers tapping lightly on the surface of his desk. He was clearly deep in thought, considering her words. Christina held her breath, unsure of what he would say next. Finally, Jack spoke, his voice thoughtful. "You've got a sharp mind, Christina, but let's see if you can put it to the test." He stood up, walking over to a large whiteboard on the side of the room. He grabbed a marker and began writing out a series of numbers and hypothetical market scenarios. "I want to see how you would handle a real investment portfolio," he said, turning to face her. "You've done your research, but now let's see if you can make the tough calls under pressure." Christina's heart raced. This was it. The moment where everything she had studied, everything she had learned, would be put to the test. She stood up, her mind racing as she approached the whiteboard. Jack's challenge was clear. It wasn't enough to talk the talk. She had to walk the walk. She took a deep breath and began to analyze the numbers, carefully considering each variable. Her mind went into overdrive as she weighed the risks and rewards, her confidence growing with each calculation. Jack watched her closely, his eyes never leaving her as she worked. The silence in the room was heavy, but Christina welcomed it. This was her moment to shine. She had spent her entire life working up to this point, and she wasn't about to let it slip away. As she finished her analysis, she turned to Jack. "Here's what I would do," she said, her voice steady and firm. "I'd recommend a diversified portfolio, but with a heavier focus on emerging markets. Specifically, I'd invest in companies that are pushing the boundaries of sustainable energy and tech. The return potential is high, but so is the risk. So, I'd balance it with safer investments in bonds and government-backed securities." Jack nodded slowly, clearly impressed. "Not bad," he said. You've got a good head on your shoulders. Let's see how you handle the next challenge." Christina felt a wave of relief wash over her, but she knew this was only the beginning. She had taken the first step, but there was so much more to prove. As Jack presented the next scenario, Christina's mind was already shifting into the next gear. She was ready. She had never been more ready in her life. Christina walked out of Jack's office, her heart still racing from the intense challenge he had set for her. She had made it through the first test, but she knew this was just the beginning. Jack had thrown real scenarios at her, testing her ability to think on her feet, and she had proven herself. But there was a lingering thought in the back of her mind. Was she truly ready for what was coming next? As the days passed, Christina immersed herself in her work, learning the ins and outs of the business world she was now a part of. She spent long hours reading financial reports, analyzing data, and attending meetings with Jack and his team. The world of high finance was fast-paced, demanding, and often overwhelming. But with each passing day, she grew more confident in her abilities. Jack was impressed with her work ethic and her ability to quickly adapt to the challenges that came her way. He began giving her more responsibility, slowly integrating her into the company's strategies. Christina was no longer just a spectator. She was part of the team. She found herself making decisions, presenting ideas, and even negotiating with clients. The transformation was incredible. The shy, unsure waitress who had once hesitated to speak up now held her own in boardrooms and conference calls. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. There were moments of doubt, moments when she questioned if she belonged in this world. The pressure was constant, the stakes high, and failure was never an option. But each time she faced a new challenge, she rose to the occasion. One morning, Jack called her into his office. He was sitting at his desk, his eyes focused on a stack of reports. When he saw her enter, he gestured for her to sit. "Christina," he said, "I've been following your work closely, and I have to say, I'm impressed. You've handled everything I've thrown at you, and you've done it with grace and intelligence. But now, I'm going to ask you to do something that might feel a bit uncomfortable." Christina raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "What do you have in mind?" Jack leaned forward, his expression serious. "I need you to take the lead on an important project. We're about to close a major deal with a group of investors, and I want you to be the one to present the proposal. It's a big responsibility, and it's going to be all on you." Christina felt a knot form in her stomach. This was a huge step. Presenting in front of a room full of seasoned investors was not something she had ever imagined herself doing. But she had come this far, and there was no turning back now. "I'm ready," she said, her voice steady, though her heart was pounding. Jack nodded, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "I knew you would be. You've earned this." The next few days were a blur of preparation. Christina worked late into the night, fine-tuning her presentation, rehearsing her speech, and anticipating the questions that might come her way. She felt the weight of the moment more than ever. The pressure was immense, but she kept reminding herself that this was her chance to prove not only to Jack, but to herself that she belonged here. The day of the presentation arrived. Christina stood in front of the conference room, her palms sweating, but her mind clear. She took a deep breath and walked into the room, where a group of investors were waiting. Jack was there, seated at the head of the table, his eyes watching her closely. As she began her presentation, she could feel her confidence growing. The words flowed easily, the data supporting her arguments, and she was able to answer every question with clarity and poise. The investors listened intently, their expressions unreadable, but Christina could see the respect in their eyes. By the time she finished, there was a brief silence in the room before one of the investors spoke up. "Impressive," he said, nodding. "You've got a sharp mind, young lady." Christina felt a surge of pride. She had done it. She had faced the challenge head-on and come out on top. When the meeting ended, Jack approached her with a genuine smile. "You did great," he said. "I knew you had it in you." Christina smiled back, her heart still racing, but this time with excitement, not fear. She had taken the leap, and it had paid off. This was just the beginning of her journey. The future was wide open, and she was ready to seize it. Christina had never felt more alive than she did in that moment. The adrenaline from her successful presentation still buzzed through her veins, but there was a new weight in her chest now, a feeling of responsibility. She had earned her place in this world, but the next challenge was already looming ahead. Jack had been right about one thing. This was just the beginning. The next few weeks passed in a blur of meetings, financial strategies, and high-pressure decisions. Christina was learning more every day, but she was also beginning to feel the strain. The hours were long, the expectations high, and the stakes only got higher. But there was a part of her that thrived on it, the part that had always wanted more, that had always believed she was capable of doing something bigger. Jack had started to rely on her more and more. He began inviting her to sit in on important meetings with potential clients, offering her a voice in the discussions, and even letting her lead smaller projects. The respect she had gained from him was apparent, but it was the respect she was starting to earn from her colleagues that meant the most to her. They had seen her as nothing more than a waitress not long ago, and now they were beginning to take her seriously as a professional. One afternoon, Jack called her into his office. Once again, this time, he looked more serious than usual. "Christina," he began, "we've got a big opportunity coming up. A high-profile client is interested in partnering with us on a new project, but they're very selective about who they work with. I need you to be part of this, to help us secure this deal." Christina's heart skipped a beat. This was it, the kind of opportunity that could change everything. "What do you need me to do?" she asked, her voice steady but filled with anticipation. Jack leaned forward, his eyes narrowing as he studied her. "I need you to lead the negotiation," he said, his tone unwavering. "You've got the knowledge, the instincts, and the drive. I think you're ready for this." The weight of his words hit her like a ton of bricks. Lead the negotiation? This was the moment she had been working toward, but it felt like a huge leap. She had never been the one calling the shots before, but there was no turning back now. She had to prove that she was capable. "I won't let you down," Christina said, her voice more confident than she felt. Jack smiled, a look of approval crossing his face. "I know you won't. You've come a long way, Christina. This is your time." The days leading up to the negotiation were a whirlwind of preparation. Christina pored over every detail of the potential deal, making sure she understood the client's needs and expectations. She rehearsed her talking points, went over the financials, and even practiced how she would handle any tough questions that might arise. It was a lot of pressure, but for the first time, she felt ready for it. The day of the negotiation arrived, and Christina walked into the conference room with a calm determination. The client was a well-known tech giant, and the room was filled with high-ranking executives who were not easily impressed. But as she stood there, presenting the proposal with clarity and confidence, she could feel the respect growing in the room. She answered every question, handled every objection, and never once faltered. By the time the meeting ended, the deal was sealed. Christina had done it. She had led the negotiation and secured the partnership. As she walked out of the conference room, Jack was waiting for her. His expression was one of quiet pride. "You did it," he said simply, but there was a weight of admiration in his voice. Christina smiled, a sense of accomplishment filling her chest. "We did it," she corrected, her voice full of newfound confidence. This was no longer just a dream. It was her reality, and she was ready for whatever came next. Christina stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling windows of Jack's office, looking out at the city skyline. The tall buildings gleamed in the late afternoon sun, and she felt a sense of accomplishment she had never known before. A year ago, she had been just a waitress, struggling to make ends meet. Now, she was a vital part of one of the most prestigious financial firms in the country. She had come a long way, but the journey wasn't over yet. There was still so much to prove. Jack's voice broke through her thoughts. "Christina," he said, his tone as serious as ever. She turned around, her expression calm, but her heart beating faster. "You've done well so far, but now it's time for the next step." She raised an eyebrow, intrigued but not entirely surprised. Jack had always pushed her to do more, to challenge herself. "What's next?" she asked, her voice steady. Jack walked over to his desk, his movements deliberate. He handed her a thick folder, the papers inside neatly organized. "I'm putting you in charge of a new project," he said. "It's a big one, and I need someone I can trust to handle it. I believe you're ready." Christina took the folder from him, her fingers brushing against the crisp paper. Her heart skipped a beat. This was it, the next step in her journey. She had earned Jack's trust, but this project would test everything she had learned. "What's the project?" she asked, her voice filled with anticipation. Jack leaned back in his chair and steepled his fingers. "We're expanding into international markets. This project will focus on establishing a new division in Europe. We need someone to lead the strategy, handle the logistics, and build the relationships with key partners. Christina's mind raced as she processed the information. This was huge. A global expansion. She was being entrusted with something monumental. I'll need a team, she said, her voice firm with determination. Jack nodded. You'll have all the resources you need. But this is on you, Christina. You need to prove that you can lead, not just manage. The weight of his words sank in, but instead of feeling overwhelmed, Christina felt a surge of excitement. This was the opportunity she had been waiting for. I won't let you down, she said, her voice full of conviction. Jack gave her a sharp look, his eyes piercing. I know you won't. That's why I'm giving you this chance. The next few weeks were a blur of meetings, phone calls, and planning. Christina dove into the project with all the focus and energy she had, assembling a team of talented individuals who shared her vision. The work was grueling, but there was a sense of purpose behind every task, every decision. She found herself balancing the demands of the project with the expectations of Jack and the company, but for the first time in her life, she didn't feel overwhelmed. She felt in control. As the project moved forward, Christina began to see the fruits of her labor. The team she had built was working together seamlessly. The strategies she had put in place were beginning to take shape, and the relationships with key partners were growing stronger. Jack was impressed with her progress, often calling her into his office to discuss updates. Each meeting left her with a renewed sense of purpose. But the real test came when they were faced with a major obstacle. A potential partner in Europe was hesitant to move forward with the deal. The negotiations had hit a standstill, and the deal was on the verge of falling apart. Christina knew this could make or break the project. She couldn't afford to lose this partnership. One afternoon, as the deadline approached, Christina sat in her office, staring at the email from the European partner. She had been working on this deal for weeks, but something wasn't right. There was a gap in their understanding, a miscommunication that could ruin everything. She picked up the phone and called the partner directly, bypassing the formalities of emails and memos. This is Christina Matthews, she said when the call was answered. I believe we need to have a real conversation. The voice on the other end hesitated, but Christina pressed on, explaining the miscommunication and offering solutions. She negotiated calmly but assertively, her confidence clear in every word. After what felt like hours, she finally heard what she had been waiting for. We're willing to proceed, the partner said, their tone much warmer now. Let's make this happen. Christina let out a breath she hadn't realized she had been holding. She had saved the deal. The project was back on track, and the expansion was one step closer to becoming a reality. When she reported back to Jack, he looked at her with a mixture of pride and approval. Well done, he said simply, but Christina could see the respect in his eyes. She had done it. She had led the team, overcome the obstacle, and proven to herself that she was ready for anything. As she walked out of Jack's office, Christina couldn't help but smile. She had come a long way from the shy waitress who had once served him at that high-end restaurant. Now, she was a force to be reckoned with. The future was hers to shape. Christina stood at the window of her office, looking out at the city. The skyline had never seemed so full of possibilities. A year ago, she never could have imagined herself here, in this position. She had come so far from the woman who used to be a waitress, struggling to make ends meet. Now, she was leading major projects, making crucial decisions, and building a future she had once only dreamed of. But even as she marveled at how much she had accomplished, there was a nagging feeling in the back of her mind. Jack had trusted her with more responsibilities, and she had proven herself capable time and time again. But there was still something more she wanted. She wanted to build something of her own. She wanted to be more than just a trusted team member. She wanted to lead in a way that wasn't tied to anyone else's vision, but her own. That thought lingered in her mind, but she pushed it aside for now. There was still work to be done. The next project was on the horizon, and Jack was counting on her to deliver. She had learned so much under his guidance, but she also knew it was time for her to start shaping her own path. She had become a force to be reckoned with, and now it was time to build her own legacy. As she prepared for another meeting with Jack, she felt the familiar nervous energy that came with every big decision. But this time, it wasn't fear that gripped her. It was excitement. She had grown, and she was ready for whatever came next. Jack's office door opened, and he walked in, his usual confident stride taking him to his desk. He paused for a moment, his eyes meeting hers. Christina, I've been impressed with your work. You've earned my trust and the trust of the company. She felt a wave of pride at his words, but she knew this was just the beginning. Thank you, Jack. I've learned a lot from you, she said, keeping her tone professional. Jack nodded, but there was something different in his expression. I want you to know that I believe in your abilities. But it's time for you to take the next step. Christina's heart skipped a beat. She had worked hard for this moment, and now it was here. What do you mean? She asked, her voice steady but her mind racing. Jack leaned forward, his gaze piercing. I'm offering you a leadership position, Christina. It's time for you to head up one of the company's key divisions. I believe you're ready to take the reins. The words hit her like a wave. This was it. The opportunity she had worked for. She could feel the weight of it, but it didn't overwhelm her. It fueled her. She was ready. I'm honored, she said, her voice firm and confident. Jack smiled, a look of approval crossing his face. I knew you'd be ready. You've come a long way. But now, it's time for you to carve out your own path. You have the skills, the vision. This is your chance to build something that's yours. Christina took a deep breath, absorbing the gravity of the moment. She had earned this. She had proven herself. I won't let you down, she said, her words filled with determination. Jack's eyes softened, and he gave her a small nod. I know you won't. Now, go and show everyone what you're capable of. As Christina left Jack's office, she felt a rush of excitement and anticipation. She had worked hard to get here, and now it was her turn to lead. The future was hers to shape, and she wasn't going to waste a single moment. She was ready to build her own legacy, to create something that would last. The world had no idea what was coming, but she knew it would be incredible. She was ready to take on the next challenge, to step into her power, and to show the world that she was not just a waitress, but a leader in her own right.